3 of the younger pack members approached slowly, their heads bowed in submission. "We didn't know," one of them said, a woman who couldn't have been older than 20. "Ethan told us the women were willing participants, that they were being compensated fairly." The anguish in her voice seemed genuine. "Maya," Ethan snarled at her, trying to reassert his dominance, but the silver light flared and he crumpled further. "Don't make this worse for yourself." But Maya ignored him, focusing entirely on me. "There are records," she said urgently. "Financial accounts, medical files, documentation of everything they did. I can help you find justice for those women." 2 other young wolves nodded in agreement. Twins named Marcus and Maria who looked barely out of their teens. "We want to help," Marcus said. "We want to make this right somehow." I could sense their sincerity, their desperate need to atone for their unknowing participation in the horrors. Caleb stepped forward, his protective instincts warring with his desire for justice. "They're telling the truth," he said after studying his former packmates. The younger members were kept in the dark about the murders. Ethan only shared the full truth with his inner circle. It seemed that even among monsters, there were degrees of complicity. Maya led us to a hidden safe in the main house, using codes she'd memorized during her time as Ethan's reluctant bookkeeper. Inside were files that documented years of systematic murder disguised as a surrogacy program. Bank records showing payments to families, medical reports detailing the failed pregnancies, and worst of all, video recordings of the procedures. "He made me keep records of everything," Maya said, her voice shaking as she handed over USB drives and file folders. "He said it was for scientific purposes, to improve the process for future attempts." I felt sick looking at the evidence, but it was exactly what we'd need to ensure justice for the murdered women. Dr. Morrison had been more thorough than I'd imagined. Each woman's complete medical history, genetic analysis, and pregnancy progression were documented in clinical detail. But it was the personal files that broke my heart, letters the women had written to their families, videos they'd recorded for their future children, evidence of hopes and dreams that had been brutally cut short. "This is enough to put them away forever," I said, though I doubted the legal system was equipped to handle werewolf serial killers. "But first, we need to make sure there are no other victims out there." The thought that other women might be going through what I'd experienced made my protective instincts flare dangerously. As we searched through the documents, a horrifying pattern emerged. The Blackwood pack wasn't operating alone. They were part of a larger network of werewolf packs across the country, all pursuing similar breeding programs. Phone records showed regular contact with groups in Montana, Oregon, and the Carolinas. "It's bigger than we thought," Caleb said grimly, spreading maps across the kitchen table. Red pins marked locations where similar disappearances had occurred, young women who'd answered surrogacy advertisements and then vanished. There could be dozens of other women in danger right now. The baby's movements became more agitated as we uncovered the scope of the conspiracy. It was as if they could sense the danger to others like their mother. "We have to warn them," I said, my hand protectively over my belly. "We have to stop this before more women die." Victoria, still weakened but listening from where she knelt on the floor, laughed bitterly. "You think you can stop all of us? This has been building for decades. You're just one woman with a trick bloodline." But her bravado couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. She knew that I'd already accomplished something they'd thought impossible. I'd survived their process and gained power instead of dying from it. Using the Blackwood's own communication systems, we began reaching out to law enforcement and hunter organizations that Maya assured us existed in the shadows. "There are still active hunter families," she explained as she helped us send encrypted messages. "They've been tracking werewolf activities for generations." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, we were in contact with FBI agents who specialized in supernatural crimes, hunter families who'd been investigating similar disappearances, and even reformed werewolves who'd been trying to expose the breeding programs from within. "Agent Sarah Martinez is with the FBI's Paranormal Crimes Division," one message read, and my heart clenched at the familiar surname. My sister Jennifer was one of the victims. I've been hunting this network for 2 years. The sister of one of the murdered women was now an FBI agent, and she was coming to help us bring down the entire conspiracy. The web of connections was staggering. Pack leaders in different states had been coordinating their efforts, sharing successful genetic profiles and elimination methods for failures. What we'd thought was an isolated horror was actually a nationwide supernatural trafficking ring that had been operating for nearly a decade. As dawn approached, our small cabin became the center of a growing resistance movement. Hunter families arrived first, armed with silver weapons and generations of knowledge about fighting supernatural threats. FBI agents followed, their modern technology complementing the hunters' traditional methods. Agent Martinez turned out to be a woman in her 30s with her sister's eyes and a determination that burned like cold fire. "Jennifer was everything to me," she said as she reviewed the evidence we'd gathered. "She thought she was helping a couple have children. Instead, she was murdered for her DNA." The professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing grief and rage that matched my own. The reformed werewolves who joined us brought intelligence about pack structures and weaknesses that proved invaluable. "The breeding program has made them desperate," explained Thomas, a wolf who'd fled his pack rather than participate in their crimes. "They're taking bigger risks, making more mistakes. This is our chance to end it." But as our forces gathered, so did our enemies. Intercepted communications suggested that other packs were mobilizing, preparing to defend their operations with lethal force. "They know we're coming," Agent Martinez warned. "They'll fight like cornered animals because they have nothing left to lose." As the stress of the situation intensified, so did the baby's supernatural abilities. During planning sessions, I found myself knowing things I shouldn't know. The locations of other breeding facilities, the true names of pack leaders, even the genetic profiles they were seeking. The child was somehow accessing the collective memory of the hunter bloodline. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Morrison said from his cell in the cabin's makeshift detention area. Even as a prisoner, his scientific curiosity couldn't be contained. "The child is already manifesting abilities that shouldn't develop until adolescence. The combination of active hunter magic during pregnancy is accelerating their development." Caleb stayed close to me as the psychic episodes intensified, his werewolf strength grounding me when the visions became overwhelming. "What do you see?" he asked during one particularly intense session. In my mind's eye, I could see a facility in Montana where 3 women were being held, another in Oregon where preparations were being made for new arrivals. "We have to move fast," I gasped as the vision faded. "There are women in immediate danger. If we don't act within the next 48 hours, more will die." The baby's urgent kicks seemed to agree, as if they too understood the stakes of what we were planning. Our final planning session took place in the main house, with representatives from 5 hunter families, 3 FBI teams, and a dozen reformed werewolves gathered around the massive dining table. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were using Ethan's own home as the headquarters for his destruction. Agent Martinez laid out the tactical situation with military precision. Coordinated strikes on 6 facilities across 4 states, timed to happen simultaneously so no pack can warn the others. We have evidence that will stand up in court, witnesses ready to testify, and enough firepower to handle resistance. The hunter families brought knowledge passed down through generations. "Silver weapons work, but you need to understand pack dynamics," explained Elena Vasquez, matriarch of a family that had been fighting werewolves since the 1800s. "Cut off the alpha's control and the rest will scatter or surrender." But it was Thomas, the reformed werewolf, who provided the most crucial intelligence. "The breeding program has created a schism in werewolf society," he explained. "Many packs oppose what's being done, but they're afraid to act alone. If we succeed here, it could trigger a civil war that cleans out the extremists permanently." As the meeting concluded and teams prepared to deploy, I felt the weight of what we were about to attempt. We weren't just seeking justice for 7 murdered women. We were trying to prevent the genocide of an entire supernatural bloodline and save countless future victims. The baby kicked strongly, as if reminding me that they would grow up in whatever world we created through our actions. There was no room for failure. At 3 a.m. Pacific time, our coordinated assault began. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through the radio as her team breached the Montana facility. 3 women secured, all alive but traumatized. Heavy resistance from pack members. They're fighting like they've got nothing to lose. The sound of silver bullets and inhuman howls carried through the static. I was positioned at a mobile command center outside the Oregon facility, my enhanced senses allowing me to coordinate the multiple raids through psychic impressions. The baby's growing power let me feel the terror and confusion of every werewolf we encountered, but also the relief and hope of the rescued women. Carolina facility secured. Came another report. 2 women recovered, facility destroyed. Pack leader eliminated. Each successful rescue felt like a weight lifting from my chest, but I knew the hardest targets were still ahead. The Blackwood estate had been left for last. It was the most heavily defended and held the most crucial evidence. Caleb stayed close to me, his wolf senses complementing my hunter abilities as we monitored the raids. "Something's wrong," he said suddenly. His head tilted as if listening to sounds only he could hear. "The pack bonds are shifting. They're not just fighting, they're calling for help." The Oregon facility erupted in chaos as additional werewolf packs arrived to defend their breeding program partners. What should have been a surgical strike became a full-scale supernatural battle as dozens of wolves poured out of the surrounding forest. Agent Rodriguez's voice was tight with stress as he reported their situation. "We're outnumbered 3-1. They've called in every pack within 100 miles. Request immediate backup." Through my psychic connection I could feel the desperation of both sides, our people fighting for justice, their people fighting for what they believed was survival. Elena Vasquez's hunter team was pinned down in the Carolina mountains, surrounded by werewolves who'd abandoned all pretense of hiding their supernatural nature. "They're not trying to capture us," she reported grimly. "This is total war. They'd rather die than let us expose their operations." The baby's movements became frantic as the violence escalated, and I realized that my child was connected not just to me, but to every supernatural being involved in the conflict. They could feel every death, every injury, every moment of terror on both sides. "We have to end this quickly," I told Agent Martinez. "The longer it goes on, the more people die." Just as our forces seemed to be gaining the upper hand, disaster struck from an unexpected source. Maya, the young werewolf who'd helped us gather evidence, suddenly turned on the hunter team she'd been guiding. Her claws tore through Agent Thompson's throat before anyone could react. "I'm sorry," she sobbed as she shifted to full wolf form, but her actions belied her words. "The pack bond, it's pulling me back. I can't fight it anymore." The psychic connection that bound werewolf packs was proving stronger than individual conscience, forcing even reformed wolves back into allegiance with their original families. Thomas and 2 other reformed werewolves were experiencing the same internal war, clutching their heads as competing loyalties tore at their minds. "The breeding program," Thomas gasped. "It's not just about creating hybrids. They've been experimenting with strengthening pack bonds, making them impossible to break." I felt a cold chill of understanding. The Blackwoods hadn't just been breeding superpowered children. They'd been perfecting methods of supernatural mind control. Every werewolf connected to the breeding program was now being pulled back into service, regardless of their personal feelings about the atrocities they'd witnessed. With our werewolf allies compromised, the tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. The Montana team was forced to retreat under heavy assault, barely escaping with their rescued victims. The Carolina hunters went radio silent, and we had to assume they'd been captured or killed. "We're pulling back," Agent Martinez announced over the emergency channel. "This is bigger than we thought. They've turned it into a supernatural war, and we're not equipped for this level of resistance." But even as she spoke, I could feel through my connection that retreat wasn't an option. Too many women were still trapped, and the werewolf packs would disappear if we gave them time to regroup. The baby kicked urgently, and suddenly my mind was flooded with visions of breeding facilities we hadn't even known existed. Underground laboratories, hidden bunkers, mobile operations that moved from state to state. There are more, I gasped. Dozens more facilities. If we don't stop them now, they'll scatter and rebuild somewhere else. Caleb's eyes met mine, and I saw my own desperation reflected there. What do you need? He asked simply. I looked at the command center around us, at the maps covered with red pins marking known facilities, at the radio chatter reporting casualties and retreats. There was only one way to end this decisively. I have to go to the source, I said, pointing to the Blackwood estate on our tactical map. The pack bonds originate from the Alpha. If I can sever Ethan's connection to the network, it'll free every werewolf he's controlling. It was dangerous beyond measure. A pregnant woman walking into the heart of enemy territory, but it was the only way to save the women still trapped and stop the conspiracy permanently. Agent Martinez shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. You're a civilian and you're carrying a child. We'll find another way. But even as she spoke, reports continued pouring in of our forces being pushed back, reformed werewolves turning against their human allies, and facilities going dark as they prepared to evacuate. There is no other way, I said, standing and moving toward the weapons cache. And I'm not just a civilian anymore. I'm the only person here with the power to break supernatural bonds. The silver light flickered around my hands as if to prove my point. Besides, they want me alive. The baby is too valuable to them to risk harming. Caleb stepped beside me, his decision made. Where she goes, I go. Someone needs to watch her back while she's working hunter magic. His loyalty was absolute, even knowing that returning to his brother's territory might mean his death. Together, we began planning what could very well be a suicide mission. The Blackwood estate looked different as we approached in the pre-dawn darkness. The elegant architecture now seemed sinister, windows glowing with unnatural light as dozens of werewolves moved through the rooms. They'd turned the mansion into a fortress, preparing for a final stand against the forces trying to destroy their way of life. 63 werewolves inside, I whispered to Caleb as my enhanced senses mapped the building. Ethan's in the basement laboratory with Dr. Morrison. Victoria's coordinating defenses from the main floor. The baby's psychic abilities were growing stronger by the hour, feeding me information I couldn't possibly know through normal means. We moved through the forest like ghosts, my hunter instincts and Caleb's wolf senses combining to avoid the patrols circling the property. But as we reached the garden where I'd first met Caleb, something felt wrong. The werewolves weren't just defending, they were herding us toward a specific entrance. It's a trap, Caleb realized just as floodlights blazed to life around us. Werewolves emerged from concealment positions, forming a circle with us at the center. But instead of attacking, they simply waited, their eyes reflecting the harsh artificial light. Ethan knew we'd come, I said, feeling the weight of inevitable confrontation settling over us like a shroud. Ethan emerged from the main house flanked by Victoria and Dr. Morrison, all three moving with the confidence of predators who'd successfully cornered their prey. But there was something different about Ethan now. His alpha presence had intensified, as if he'd been drawing power from every werewolf connected to the breeding program. "Sister-in-law," he said mockingly to me, then nodded to Caleb. "Brother, I'm disappointed but not surprised. You always were too soft for what needed to be done." His transformation was more complete than before, still recognizably human, but with the enhanced musculature and predatory grace of his wolf form bleeding through. "Let the women go," I said, the silver light beginning to gather around my hands. "Your breeding program is over. The authorities know everything, the network is being dismantled. There's nowhere left to run." But Ethan's smile was confident, almost pitying. "On the contrary," he replied, "this is where our real work begins. You've proven that hunter-werewolf hybrids are not only possible but incredibly powerful. Your child will be the first of a new species, one that doesn't need to hide in the shadows or fear human persecution." His eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. "Join us willingly, and you'll be treated as the mother of evolution. Refuse, and we'll take the child anyway." The threat to my unborn child triggered something primal in my hunter bloodline. The silver light exploded outward with such force that every werewolf in the circle stumbled backward, some falling to their knees. But this time the power didn't stop at my hands. It flowed through my entire body, transforming me into something I'd never imagined possible. Impossible, Dr. Morrison breathed, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The genetic fusion shouldn't be complete until after birth. The child is sharing power with the mother. I could feel it too. My baby's abilities merging with my own, creating something that was neither purely hunter nor the hybrid they'd been trying to create. The werewolves' pack bond began to fracture under the assault of pure hunter magic. Several of the younger wolves whimpered and tried to flee, their connection to Ethan's authority severing like cut strings. "Stop her!" Ethan roared, but his own enhanced alpha powers were being countered by abilities he couldn't understand or control. Caleb moved to stand beside me, his own transformation beginning as he prepared to defend his mate and child. But as his wolf form emerged, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual brown and gray fur, silver highlights appeared throughout his coat, reflecting and amplifying the light pouring from my body. Our bond was changing him too, making him something new. As my power reached its peak, a shocking revelation surfaced through the psychic chaos. Ethan wasn't the true alpha of this network. He was being controlled by something else, something older and more powerful that had been manipulating the breeding program from the shadows. The real leader was Dr. Morrison, whose human appearance concealed supernatural abilities far beyond any werewolf. "You finally see," Morrison said as his disguise fell away, revealing elongated limbs, eyes that glowed with ancient hunger, and teeth that belonged to no earthly predator. "I've been guiding werewolf evolution for centuries, steering them toward this moment. The breeding program was never about creating hybrids. It was about creating vessels strong enough to contain my true offspring." The baby in my womb reacted violently to his presence, kicking and moving as if trying to escape. Through our connection, I felt their terror and understood the horrible truth. Morrison wasn't trying to create powerful children. He was trying to create bodies that could host his parasitic essence, allowing him to reproduce and spread his influence through supernatural bloodlines. "Every woman who died," I said, horror and rage mixing in equal measure. "Every child that was lost, you were trying to possess them." Morrison nodded with clinical satisfaction. The hunter bloodline proved most resilient, but even it required specific conditions to survive the possession process. "Your child will be the first to successfully host my consciousness while retaining their own powers." The revelation transformed our desperate rescue mission into something far more significant. We weren't just fighting to save kidnapped women, we were fighting to prevent an ancient evil from gaining a foothold in the modern world. The silver light around me intensified as I realized that every supernatural ability I'd gained was preparing me for this confrontation. Morrison's true form towered over the assembled werewolves, who were now cowering in terror rather than following orders. Even Ethan seemed diminished in the presence of his true master, his alpha authority revealed as an illusion controlled by the creature who'd been pulling his strings for years. "You cannot stop what has already begun," Morrison hissed, his voice carrying harmonics that hurt to hear. "The child carries my essence now. In moments, they will be born, and I will have a body capable of reshaping both the human and supernatural worlds." As he spoke, I felt contractions beginning, not natural labor, but something being forced by supernatural influence. Caleb's silver-touched wolf form placed itself between me and Morrison, but we both knew physical strength wouldn't be enough against a creature that old and powerful. "The pack bonds," I gasped between contractions. "He's been using them to drain power from every werewolf in the network. That's how he's maintained his strength for centuries." The baby's frantic movements suddenly stopped, and through our connection, I felt them gathering power for what would either be their birth or their sacrifice. The final battle wasn't just beginning. It was about to be decided by a child who hadn't even drawn their first breath. The contractions stopped as suddenly as they'd begun, but not because Morrison's influence had weakened. Instead, I felt my child make a conscious decision through our psychic bond. They were choosing to fight rather than be born into captivity. The baby's power surged through me with such intensity that the silver light became blinding, forcing every supernatural being in the clearing to shield their eyes. "Impossible," Morrison snarled, his ancient confidence faltering for the first time in centuries. "An unborn child cannot resist possession. The consciousness isn't fully formed yet." But through our connection, I could feel my baby's awareness. Ancient hunter memories awakening, genetic knowledge passed down through bloodlines, and something else entirely. This child was not just human werewolf hybrid, but something that Morrison's parasitic essence had never encountered. Caleb's silver-touched form pressed closer to me, his strength anchoring me as the supernatural forces battled within my womb. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice strained but steady. Through the psychic chaos, I felt my child's response. Not words but pure intent. They needed to be born, but on their own terms, in their own time, with their own power intact. "The delivery has to happen now," I gasped. "But not here. Not where he can immediately possess them." The baby kicked once, urgently, and suddenly I understood their plan. They weren't just trying to avoid possession. They were preparing to turn Morrison's own power against him. Despite the supernatural battle raging around us, Caleb managed to carry me back to the hidden cabin where our resistance had begun. The silver-lined walls that had once protected us from werewolf attacks now served as a barrier against Morrison's possession attempts. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the crushing psychic pressure lifted, allowing me to think clearly for the first time in hours. The silver disrupts his essence, I realized, understanding flooding through me as the baby's knowledge merged with my own consciousness. That's why hunter bloodlines were resistant to possession. We carry natural silver sensitivity in our genetics. The cabin wasn't just a safe house. It was a supernatural delivery room designed by centuries of evolutionary warfare. Agent Martinez and Elena Vasquez had arrived ahead of us, converting the cabin into a makeshift medical facility using supplies salvaged from the Blackwood estate. "How long do we have?" Martinez asked as she helped me onto the improvised delivery table. Outside, Morrison's inhuman roars echoed through the forest as he discovered our escape. "Not long," Elena said grimly, checking her silver ammunition. "But maybe long enough." She'd brought reinforcements, 3 more hunter families who'd answered her call for aid, all armed with weapons that could harm creatures like Morrison. But I could feel through my enhanced senses that conventional weapons wouldn't be enough against something that had survived for millennia. The baby shifted within me, and suddenly I understood the final piece of their plan. They weren't just going to be born. They were going to be born with the accumulated power of every supernatural being Morrison had possessed over the centuries, turning his own strength against him in a way no one had ever attempted. As labor began in earnest, Elena shared the final piece of knowledge I needed to save my child. "Your grandmother Sarah wasn't just a survivor," she said, holding my hand as another contraction peaked. "She was the daughter of the most powerful hunter bloodline in history. The Chen family didn't just hunt werewolves, they hunted creatures like Morrison." Through the silver-enhanced psychic connection, ancestral memories flooded my consciousness. Generations of Chen hunters had faced parasitic entities, learning their weaknesses and developing countermeasures. The knowledge had been dormant in my bloodline, waiting for the right circumstances to awaken. My child carried not just hunter and werewolf genetics, but the accumulated supernatural knowledge of both species. "The binding ritual," I gasped as the memories crystallized. "There's a way to trap Morrison's essence, but it requires..." I trailed off as the full horror of what needed to be done became clear. The ritual required a willing host, someone who could contain Morrison's power long enough for it to be destroyed, but the process would likely kill the host. Caleb's eyes met mine, and I saw that he'd reached the same conclusion. His silver-touched werewolf form made him the perfect vessel, strong enough to contain Morrison temporarily, but different enough from normal werewolves to resist complete possession. "No," I said firmly, but he was already moving toward the cabin's weapon cache. "It's the only way to protect you and the baby," he said, loading silver bullets into a specially modified gun. "The binding ritual will hold him long enough for your child to be born safely." After that. He didn't need to finish. We both knew what after that meant. The cabin shook as Morrison arrived with the full force of his supernatural army. But instead of werewolves, he'd brought creatures I'd never imagined. Possessed humans whose bodies had been twisted by his essence, shadow beings that seemed to absorb light, and worst of all, the children. The hybrid offspring from previous breeding programs, now revealed as partially possessed vessels for fragments of Morrison's consciousness. "Give me the child!" Morrison's voice boomed from multiple throats as his possessed servants surrounded the cabin. "The birth must happen under my direct influence, or the possession will fail." But his desperation was showing, for all his power. He needed my baby to be born in specific conditions, which meant we still had leverage. Agent Martinez and her team opened fire with silver ammunition, but the possessed creatures barely flinched. "The possession makes them immune to most physical damage," Elena shouted over the gunfire. "We need to target Morrison's essence directly, not his vessels." "But how do you fight an enemy that exists partially in the physical world and partially in the supernatural realm?" The answer came through my child's psychic connection. The baby could see Morrison's true form, not the physical manifestation, but the parasitic essence that connected all his vessels. If I could channel their perception through my hunter abilities, I might be able to target his core consciousness instead of his expendable bodies. "I need to get closer," I told Caleb between contractions. Close enough to see him the way the baby sees him. It was insane, walking into battle while in active labor, but it was our only chance to end this permanently. With Caleb and Elena flanking me, I walked out of the cabin's protection to face Morrison directly. The possessed creatures parted to let us pass, forming a circle around the clearing where this supernatural war would reach its conclusion. Morrison's true form was finally visible through my enhanced perception. A writhing mass of shadow and hunger that had been feeding on supernatural beings for centuries. "You cannot stop what has already begun," Morrison said through a dozen mouths. "The child will be mine, willing or not." But as another contraction peaked, I felt my baby's response. Not fear but anticipation. They were ready to be born and they were ready to fight. The delivery happened faster than should have been possible, as if my child was eager to escape the womb and join the battle. But as soon as they took their first breath, Morrison's essence surged forward, trying to possess the newborn before their own consciousness could fully solidify. That's when Caleb enacted the binding ritual. Using knowledge passed down through hunter bloodlines, he spoke words in a language older than recorded history, offering his own body as a temporary vessel for Morrison's essence. The ancient creature, caught off guard by finding a willing host, poured his consciousness into Caleb's silver-touched form, not realizing that the ritual was designed to trap him there. "Now!" Elena shouted, and I raised my newborn child, their eyes already glowing with inherited power. Through our connection, I channeled every ounce of hunter magic in my bloodline, focusing it through my baby's pure supernatural essence. The silver light that erupted from us both was unlike anything Morrison had encountered in his centuries of existence. Morrison's scream echoed from both Caleb's throat and the supernatural realm as he realized he'd been trapped by his own greed. The binding ritual didn't just contain him. It connected his essence directly to my child's power, creating a feedback loop that began tearing apart his consciousness piece by piece. "The silver in Caleb's werewolf form is poisoning Morrison's essence," Elena explained as we watched the ancient creature's servants collapse around us, their connection to their master severed. "But it's killing Caleb too. The binding won't hold forever." My newborn baby, a daughter I realized with sudden clarity, looked up at me with eyes that held centuries of wisdom. Through our bond, I felt her determination to save the man who'd sacrificed himself for her chance at life. But she was just minutes old, her power raw and untrained. She needed guidance to use her abilities effectively. "Tell me what to do," I whispered to my daughter, and somehow, impossibly, she answered through our psychic connection. Not with words, but with images and feelings that showed me exactly how to redirect Morrison's trapped essence. Instead of letting it consume Caleb, we could force it back into the supernatural realm where it belonged, sealing it away from the physical world permanently. The process required perfect timing and absolute trust between mother and child. As Morrison's essence surged within Caleb's body, seeking escape, my daughter and I synchronized our powers, creating a supernatural portal that would banish the ancient parasite forever. But opening such a portal while he was still connected to Caleb meant we risked losing them both. The portal opened like a wound in reality, its edges crackling with silver fire that made every supernatural being in the clearing flinch away. Morrison's essence, suddenly aware of what we were attempting, fought desperately against the binding, causing Caleb's body to convulse with supernatural agony. "I can't hold him much longer," Caleb gasped, his human consciousness struggling to maintain control as Morrison's parasitic influence tried to overwhelm him completely. Blood ran from his eyes and nose as the battle between their essences tore at his physical form. "You have to do it now." My daughter's tiny hand grasped my finger with supernatural strength, and through our connection, I felt her pouring every ounce of her inherited power into the banishment ritual. The silver light intensified until it became painful to look at directly, and Morrison's screams reached frequencies that shattered every window in the surrounding forest. But as the ancient creature was pulled toward the portal, he made one final desperate attempt to survive. Instead of fighting the banishment, he tried to take Caleb's consciousness with him, planning to possess my mate's body in the supernatural realm. That's when my daughter did something that shocked even me. She followed Morrison into the portal, her newborn spirit chasing the ancient parasite into dimensions beyond human understanding. "No!" I screamed, but Elena held me back as the portal began to collapse. "She knows what she's doing," the hunter matriarch said firmly. "The child has abilities none of us understand. Trust her." Through our fading connection, I felt my daughter's absolute confidence. She wasn't just banishing Morrison. She was ensuring he could never return by severing his connection to our reality at its source. For 3 agonizing minutes, the portal hung open while my daughter battled Morrison in the space between realities. Through our psychic bond, I experienced fragments of their conflict, a realm where thoughts became weapons and willpower determined existence itself. My baby, born with the accumulated knowledge of generations, was more than a match for the ancient parasite in this environment. Morrison's consciousness, bloated by centuries of feeding on other beings, was actually a weakness in the supernatural realm. His stolen power made him slow and unwieldy compared to my daughter's pure, focused essence. She moved through the dimensional space like liquid light, systematically dismantling the connections that had allowed Morrison to influence the physical world. Caleb's body collapsed as Morrison's essence was finally severed from him completely, but he was still breathing. The silver in his werewolf genetics had protected his core consciousness from possession, though the ordeal had left him unconscious and critically weakened. "He'll live," Elena confirmed after checking his vital signs. "The binding is broken, and Morrison's influence is gone." The portal began to shrink as my daughter completed her work, but I could feel her growing exhaustion through our connection. The effort of banishing a creature as powerful as Morrison was draining her inherited abilities faster than they could regenerate. If she didn't return soon, she might become trapped in the supernatural realm herself. "Come back to me," I whispered, focusing all my love and desperation through our psychic bond. "You've done enough. Come home." For a terrifying moment, there was only silence. Then, like a silver star falling from heaven, my daughter's spirit shot back through the collapsing portal and into her waiting body. 3 months after Morrison's defeat, our makeshift family had settled into a new normal at a secure facility run by the FBI's Paranormal Crimes Division. My daughter, whom we'd named Sarah after my grandmother, was developing at an accelerated rate that fascinated the researchers but didn't concern me. She was healthy, happy, and most importantly, free to grow up without the threat of supernatural possession. Caleb had recovered from his ordeal, though the experience had left him changed. The silver in his werewolf form had become permanent, making him something unique in supernatural society, a bridge between the werewolf and hunter communities. "I can feel other possessed beings," he explained during one of our long talks. "Morrison wasn't the only parasitic entity out there, but now I can help identify them before they build networks like the breeding program." Agent Martinez had been promoted to head the new Joint Supernatural Crimes Task Force, an organization that brought together hunters, reformed werewolves, and government agents to prevent future atrocities. The breeding program network has been completely dismantled, she reported during one of our briefings. 43 facilities shut down, over 200 women rescued, and 67 supernatural criminals in custody. The hunter families who'd helped us had formed a new council dedicated to protecting supernatural beings rather than hunting them indiscriminately. Elena Vasquez served as their leader, using centuries of accumulated knowledge to train a new generation of protectors. The old ways of automatic hostility between hunters and werewolves died with Morrison, she told me. Your daughter has shown us that cooperation creates power beyond what either group could achieve alone. But it was the reformed werewolves who'd undergone the most dramatic transformation. Free from Morrison's influence and the breeding program's mind control, they'd formed their own support network to help pack members adjust to life without an authoritarian alpha structure. Many had chosen to integrate into human society, while others formed new, healthier pack bonds based on mutual consent rather than dominance. 2 years later, I stood in the garden of our new home, a secure but comfortable house provided by the government in exchange for my occasional consulting work with the Supernatural Crimes Task Force. Sarah was walking now, her silver-touched eyes taking in the world with the curiosity of any normal toddler, though I knew she was far from ordinary. Caleb emerged from the house carrying a cup of coffee and the morning briefing reports. We'd married 6 months after Morrison's defeat, a ceremony attended by hunters, werewolves, FBI agents, and even a few reformed supernatural criminals who'd become friends. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I first answered that surrogacy advertisement, but it was perfect in ways I never could have imagined. Any new cases? I asked, settling into the porch swing beside him. The Supernatural Crimes Task Force occasionally needed my hunter abilities to investigate particularly complex situations, though most of my time was devoted to raising Sarah and documenting the knowledge she'd inherited from both bloodlines. 3 possible possession cases in the Pacific Northwest, he replied, scanning the reports. But nothing like Morrison. Elena thinks they're just standard hauntings that got out of hand. The systematic supernatural trafficking that had once threatened women across the country had been replaced by isolated incidents that existing authorities could handle without major operations. Sarah toddled over to us, babbling in what sounded like random syllables but which I'd learned was actually a mixture of English, the ancient hunter language, and werewolf pack communication. She was literally creating her own hybrid vocabulary, just as she was creating her own hybrid identity as someone who belonged fully to both the human and supernatural worlds. "Mama," she said clearly, holding up a flower she'd picked from the garden. The simple word carried such joy that my eyes filled with tears, as they did every time I remembered how close we'd come to losing everything. "Papa," she added, offering the flower to Caleb, who accepted it with the solemnity of receiving a crown jewel. As I watched my family in the peaceful garden, surrounded by the evidence of our hard-won normal life, I reflected on how dramatically my world had changed. I'd started as a desperate college student willing to do anything for money. I'd survived as a supernatural prisoner fighting for my life and my child's freedom. And I'd emerged as something I'd never expected to be, a bridge between worlds, a protector of the innocent, and most importantly, a mother raising the next generation of those who would ensure that the horrors we'd faced could never happen again. The howling that had once terrified me in the Blackwood estate was gone forever, replaced by laughter, love, and the promise of a future where supernatural beings and humans could coexist without fear. Sarah would grow up in a world where her unique heritage was a source of strength rather than danger, where her abilities would be used to protect others rather than serve the ambitions of monsters. As the sun set over our garden, painting the sky in shades of silver and gold, I held my daughter close and felt genuinely at peace for the first time since this whole nightmare had begun. We'd all found our happily ever after, not the traditional fairy tale ending, but something better. A new beginning built on justice, love, and the absolute certainty that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The Surrogate's Wolfsbane had bloomed into something beautiful after all.